The stagecoach lurched to a halt with a groan that echoed through the frozen afternoon air. Clara Rosalind Vale gripped the worn leather handle beside her seat, steadying herself as the driver called out, "Dry Pine, Montana, end of the line." Through the frost-etched window, she glimpsed a town that looked more like a collection of weathered wooden buildings huddled against the cold than the prosperous settlement Owen Mather had described in his letters. Snow dusted the rooftops like flour on a baker's table, and smoke rose from chimneys in thin, desperate columns against the gray sky. Clara was the last passenger to descend. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, handed down her traveling case with surprising gentleness. "You got folks meeting you, miss?" "Yes," she said, though the word tasted like a lie on her tongue. "Mr. Owen Mather. He owns a horse ranch near here." The driver's brow furrowed. "Mather can't say I know the name, and I've been running this route for 8 years. You sure you got the right town?" Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Quite sure. Perhaps he lives outside town proper." The driver shrugged and climbed back to his perch. "Well, good luck to you. Miss Jenkins's general store is that way if you need directions. They know everyone in these parts." The stagecoach pulled away, leaving Clara standing alone on the frozen main street. She was 27 years old, taller than most women and broader in the shoulders, built more for honest work than delicate tea parties, as her mother used to say with that particular tone of disappointment. She had sold everything to come here: her grandmother's pearl brooch, the small inheritance from her father, even the good wool coat she'd worn to church every Sunday. All of it converted to train tickets and stagecoach fare, carrying her 2,000 miles from Boston to this snow-bitten town at the edge of civilization. In her gloved hand, she clutched the bundle of letters tied with twine, Owen Mather's letters, written in a careful, educated hand. They spoke of his horse ranch, his need for a capable wife, his loneliness in the Montana Territory. The matchmaking agency had vouched for him, taken her fee, arranged everything. But no one stood waiting. Clara pulled her traveling cloak tighter and walked toward the general store, her boots crunching on the packed snow. Men lounging outside the saloon turned to watch her pass. She kept her chin up, though she could feel their eyes taking inventory: her plain brown dress, her work-roughened hands, her height that put her at eye level with most of them. "Well, well," one called out, his words slurred with afternoon whiskey. "That's a tall drink of water. You lose your way, sweetheart." Clara didn't acknowledge him. She'd learned long ago that responding to such men only encouraged them. The general store smelled of pickle brine, leather, and kerosene. A thin man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his ledger. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Mr. Owen Mather. He owns a horse ranch in these parts." The storekeeper's expression shifted to confusion. "Mather, no, miss. Nobody by that name around here. You might try asking at the land office, but I know every rancher within 50 miles. The words hit Clara like cold water, but she kept her composure. "I see. And where might I find lodging for the night?" "Hey, Mrs. Harriet's boarding house, 2 streets over, though she's particular about taking in strangers without references." Clara thanked him and left, though she could feel his curious gaze following her. Outside, the afternoon sun was already sliding toward the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks orange and pink. The temperature was dropping fast. The boarding house was a 2-story building with lace curtains in the windows and a sign that read, "Respectable lodging for respectable people." Clara knocked, and a severe-looking woman in black answered. "I need a room for the night." Clara said, "Mrs." Harriet looked her up and down. "You have references, someone to vouch for you?" "I've just arrived from Boston. I was to meet Mr. Owen Mather." "Never heard of him." The woman's eyes narrowed. "And I don't take in women traveling alone without proper introductions. This is a decent establishment. I can pay." "I'm sure you can." The door began to close. "Try the saloon. They're less particular about their clientele. The door shut with finality. Clara stood on the porch, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She tried 2 more establishments, a smaller boarding house, and even the parsonage beside the abandoned church. Each time, the response was the same. No room for a woman alone, a stranger with no connections, no one to speak for her character. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the cold became something alive, something that bit through her cloak and dress, numbed her fingers even through her gloves. The saloon grew louder as night fell, piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the street. She gave it wide berth, knowing what kind of offers awaited her there. Finally, she found herself at the edge of town, where a grain warehouse stood partially empty for the winter. The door was barred, but there was a covered loading area, protection from the wind at least. Clara set down her traveling case and sank onto a wooden crate, pulling her cloak around her like a tent. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She'd eaten only a few crackers since morning, saving her coins. But worse than hunger was the creeping realization that she'd been fooled. There was no Owen Mather, no horse ranch, no new life waiting for her, just another clever scheme to part desperate women from their money. She thought of the other women at the matchmaking agency. All of them past the bloom of youth. All of them deemed too plain or too tall or too strong or too something to find husbands the conventional way. How many others had made journeys like this, only to find nothing at the end but an empty promise? Clara didn't cry. She'd learned young that tears solved nothing. Instead, she calculated. She had enough money for perhaps 3 days of meals, if she was careful. No return ticket, no references for work, no family to wire for help. She'd burned those bridges when she'd announced her intention to marry a stranger in Montana. The cold pressed in, and she dozed fitfully, jerking awake whenever footsteps approached. Once, a drunk stumbled into the loading area, but she pressed herself into the shadows, and he wandered away, singing off-key about a girl he'd known in Kansas City. She must have fallen into deeper sleep eventually, because she woke to find snow falling softly, dusting her cloak and gathering in the folds of her skirt. Her fingers were numb, her toes beyond feeling. This was how people died out here. She knew, quietly in the margins, where nobody bothered to look. This is no place for someone new to winter in these parts. The voice was deep, steady, coming from a silhouette backlit by a lantern. Clara struggled to sit up, her joints stiff with cold. Especially, the man continued, if you don't know anyone to take you in. Clara found her voice, though it came out hoarse. I know Owen Mather, or thought I did. The man stepped closer, and she could make out his features in the lantern light. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore a heavy coat and work boots, a hat pulled low over dark hair. There was something in his eyes, not pity, exactly, but a kind of careful assessment. There's no Owen Mather in these parts, he said simply. Hasn't been for the 10 years I've lived here. Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound. So I've discovered. He studied her for a moment longer, then seemed to make a decision. You can't stay here. You'll be frozen solid by morning. I've got a cabin about a mile out. It's not fancy, but it's warm. Every lesson Clara had learned about safety and propriety screamed against going with a strange man. But propriety was a luxury for women who had other choices. Why? She asked. He tilted his head slightly. Why what? Why offer help to a stranger? He considered this. Because I've been cold and alone in a place where nobody knew my name, and because morning will come either way. But you might not see it if you stay here. Clara looked at him, really looked. His hands were calloused but clean, his coat mended with careful stitches. He stood at a respectful distance, making no move to come closer. What's your name? She asked. Elias Boone. I run a hunting outfit on the north side of town. Clara rose stiffly. Decision made. What did she have to lose that wasn't already lost? Clara Vale, and I suppose I've got no better options. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened slightly. No, ma'am. I don't suppose you do. He picked up her traveling case before she could protest. Can you ride? I brought an extra horse. I can manage. They walked to where 2 horses waited, their breath steaming in the cold air. Elias helped her mount with impersonal efficiency, then swung up onto his own horse. They rode in silence through the falling snow, the town lights fading behind them until there was only darkness and the soft sound of hooves on snow. The cabin appeared like something from a fairy tale, small but sturdy, with light glowing warm through the windows and smoke rising from the chimney inside. It was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A ladder led to what must be a loft sleeping area. Elias added wood to the fire and set a kettle on to boil. Sit, he said, indicating the chair nearest the fire. You look half frozen. Clara sat, feeling the warmth seep painfully back into her fingers and toes. He made tea, strong and black, and handed her a cup without ceremony. Then he busied himself at the stove, and soon the smell of beans and salt pork filled the cabin. Eat, he said, setting a plate before her. Questions can wait for morning. Clara ate slowly, the hot food bringing tears to her eyes. When she finished, she found her voice again. This is my first night. He looked at her, waiting. My first night sleeping in the West, I thought it would be different. Elias leaned back in his chair, considering. First nights are rarely what we expect, but they're important all the same. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because they set the tone for what comes after, and yours. He paused, choosing his words. Yours begins with someone seeing you as a real person, not a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be taken. Remember that. Clara wrapped her hands around her empty cup, feeling something inside her unclench just slightly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin was warm and safe. And for tonight, that was enough. Clara woke to gray morning light filtering through the cabin window. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was the rough wooden walls, the dying embers in the fireplace, the heavy quilts that smelled of cedar and smoke. Then memory returned, and with it, the weight of her situation. Elias was gone, but he'd left the fire banked and a note on the table. Gone to check trap lines, coffee on the stove. Stay warm. E.B. She dressed quickly in the cold air and found the coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe. Through the window, she could see snow still falling, lighter now, adding to the deep drifts that surrounded the cabin. Her traveling case sat by the door where Elias had placed it, a reminder that this shelter was temporary. Clara spent the morning taking stock. She had $3.47. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a sewing kit, her mother's Bible, the worthless letters from a man who didn't exist. Not enough to start over, barely enough to survive. When Elias returned near noon, snow dusting his shoulders, he found her darning a hole in her second-best stockings. He hung his coat and hat by the door, moving with the easy efficiency of a man comfortable in his own space. Storms letting up, he said. Roads should be passable by tomorrow. Clara set down her sewing. Then I should return to town. To where? His tone was mild, but the question cut deep. I'll find something. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Mrs. Harriet won't have changed her mind overnight. Neither will the others. Then I'll sleep in the warehouse again, and be frozen by week's end. He studied her over his cup. What skills do you have? Clara lifted her chin. I can read, write, and figure. I can sew, cook, keep house. I've worked in a mill and know my way around machinery. I'm not afraid of hard work. I don't doubt it. He was quiet for a moment. There's a woman in town, Widow Hart. She runs a small eating house. Respectable place. She might have work. And she keeps a room behind the kitchen. But she's particular about who she hires. Meaning she won't hire someone who spent the night in a bachelor's cabin. meaning she values character over gossip. I'll speak for you, if you're willing." Clara looked at him sharply. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because someone should." That afternoon, he saddled the horses again. Clara noticed he'd chosen a different route into town, one that skirted the main street and brought them to the back of a modest building painted cheerful yellow despite the weather. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the windows, Clara could see tables set with checkered cloths. Elias knocked at the back door. It opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, flour dusting her apron. Her face was lined but kind, her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Elias Boone," she said, not unkindly but with surprise. "Haven't seen you in town for a month or more." "Mrs. Hart, this is Miss Clara Vale. She's new to town and looking for honest work." The widow's eyes moved to Clara, taking in everything from her travel-worn dress to her straight posture. "From the East, by the look of you." "Boston, ma'am." "And what brings a Boston woman to dry pine in the dead of winter?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "A promise that turned out to be a lie. But I'm here now, and I need work." "Mrs. Hart looked between them. "Elias, might I speak with Miss Vale alone?" He nodded and stepped outside. The widow gestured for Clara to sit at the kitchen table, then poured 2 cups of tea from a pot on the stove. "Tell me the truth," she said simply. "All of it." So Clara did. The matchmaking agency, the letters, the journey west, the empty promises. She left nothing out, not even the night in the warehouse or Elias finding her there. When she finished, Mrs. Hart was quiet for a long moment. "You're not the first," she said finally. "Won't be the last. These men who write pretty letters and disappear, they're like wolves, preying on women's hopes." She studied Clara's hands. "You say you can cook?" "Yes, ma'am. Plain food, nothing fancy." "Can you handle a kitchen full of hungry miners and railroad workers up before dawn, working till after dark?" "I can." "The pay is small. Room and board and $2 a week. The room's not much used to be a pantry, but it's warm and has a lock on the door. You'll help with cooking, serving, cleaning. Sunday mornings off for church if you're inclined." "I accept." Mrs. Hart almost smiled. "Don't you want to see the room first?" "A room with a lock and honest work sounds like luxury to me right now." This time the widow did smile. "Practical. I like that. You can start tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock sharp." She showed Clara the room, tiny indeed, with just space for a narrow bed and a small chest, but clean and, as promised, warm. Then she called Elias back in. "Miss Vale will be working for me," she announced, "and staying in my back room, so anyone with gossip to spread can take it up with me directly." Elias nodded, unsurprised. "She'll do well here." Clara walked him to his horse, aware of Mrs. Hart watching from the window. "Thank you," she said. "I won't forget this." "Nothing to forget. You'd have found your way with or without me." He swung up into the saddle. "Take care, Miss Vale." She watched him ride away, then returned to the kitchen where Mrs. Hart was already planning tomorrow's menu. "That man," the widow said, not looking up from her list, "is the most decent soul in this territory, also the loneliest, though he'd never admit it. Lost his wife and child to fever 3 years back. Keeps to himself mostly now." Clara said nothing, but she filed the information away. Her first morning in the kitchen came dark and cold. Clara rose at 3:30, dressed by lamplight, and found Mrs. Hart already working, bread dough rising and coffee brewing. They worked in companionable silence, preparing for the breakfast rush. The eating house filled as dawn broke, miners heading to their shifts, railroad workers, shopkeepers opening for business. Clara served plates of eggs and bacon, poured endless cups of coffee, cleared and wiped tables. Her feet ached and her back complained, but it was honest work, and at the end of the morning, Several men had left coins beside their plates. "Tips, Mrs." Hart explained, dividing them fairly. "Save what you can. This town can be hard on women alone." Days passed in a rhythm of work. Clara learned the regulars' preferences, how Tom Garrett liked his eggs over easy, how the telegraph operator Samuel Chen took his coffee black with 2 sugars, how the old prospector everyone called Dusty Pete would talk your ear off if you let him, but always left a dime tip. She also learned the town's whispers, how she was that woman from the warehouse, the one who rode out with Elias Boone. Some men tried to be familiar, making suggestions about other ways she could earn money. Clara perfected a stone face and deaf ears, pouring their coffee without acknowledgement until they gave up. 4 days after she started work, she found a package on the back step when she went to empty the wash water. Brown paper, her name written in a careful hand. Inside was good wool fabric, dark blue, enough for a winter dress. A note read simply, "Your hands are skilled. I noticed the stitching. E.B. Mrs." Hart saw her holding it. "That from who I think?" Clara nodded. "He brings me venison sometimes, firewood when I'm low. Never accepts payment." She paused. "Never left gifts for my other girls. Though..." That evening, Clara began cutting the fabric, working by lamplight after the kitchen closed. The wool was quality, better than anything she'd owned. She found herself taking extra care with each seam, each buttonhole. The next package appeared 3 days later. This time, a torn saddlebag with broken stringing. No note, but the message was clear. He was offering her work she could do in the evenings, a way to earn extra money. She repaired it carefully, left it on the same back step. 2 mornings later, there was payment and another item, a bridle with worn leather, then a pair of work gloves that needed patching. They didn't speak. He didn't come to the eating house, and she didn't see him in town. But the packages continued, small opportunities wrapped in brown paper, always with fair payment. "You could thank him in person, Mrs." Hart suggested one evening, watching Clara work on a particularly complex harness repair. "I could, but you won't." Clara tied off a stitch. "He's helping me stand on my own feet. Seems wrong to complicate that with gratitude." Mrs. Hart snorted. "Gratitude? That what young folks call it now?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept sewing. One morning, 2 weeks into her employment, Clara served breakfast to a group of men she didn't recognize. They were louder than the regulars, already smelling of whiskey despite the early hour. "Well, look here," one said, grabbing her wrist as she set down his plate. "You're that tall drink of water from the stagecoach. Found work after all." Clara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Please let go." "Heard you spent a night with Boone. He treat you right, or you looking for better offers?" The eating house went quiet. Mrs. Hart emerged from the kitchen, but before she could speak, the door opened. Elias stood in the doorway, snow swirling behind him. His eyes took in the scene, Clara's rigid posture, the man's hand on her wrist, the tension in the room. He walked over, slow and deliberate. "Morning, Frank." The man Frank released Clara's wrist. "Boone, just having a friendly chat." Seemed one-sided. Elias's voice was mild, but something in his stance made Frank shift uncomfortably. "Miss Vale, might I have coffee when you get a chance?" Clara found her voice. "Of course." Frank stood abruptly, tossing coins on the table. "We were just leaving anyway." His companions followed him out, casting nervous glances at Elias. The normal hum of conversation resumed. Elias took a seat at the corner table, and Clara brought him coffee with steady hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "You were handling it fine." "Was I?" "Would have, but no harm in evening the odds." He paused. "How are you finding the work?" "Hard, honest, good." He nodded, satisfied. And she understood this was why he'd finally come to see for himself that she was truly all right. He finished his coffee, left payment and a generous tip, and departed with only a nod to Mrs. Hart. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed thinking about hands. Frank's grabbing fingers, her own hands, red from washing dishes, pricked from needlework, and Elias's hands, large and careful, that had helped her mount a horse in the snow, that wrote notes in precise letters, that left packages like offerings at a shrine. Tomorrow would bring more work, more whispers, more small tests of will, but tonight she had a locked door, a belly full of food she'd helped cook, and the beginning of something that might, if she was careful, grow into a life. Outside, snow began to fall again. Muffling the sounds of the town, Clara closed her eyes and slept, dreaming of blue wool and careful stitches, of coffee served in silence and understanding that needed no words. The encounter with Frank and his companions marked a shift in how the town saw Clara. Some viewed her with newfound respect, a woman who could hold her ground. Others whispered more viciously, speaking of Elias as her protector in terms that made her cheeks burn. But Clara had learned long ago that gossip was like wind. It blew fierce and then moved on to rattle other windows. 3 weeks into her employment, on an evening when spring seemed impossibly far away, Clara heard a knock at the kitchen's back door. Mrs. Hart had already retired, and Clara was finishing the last of her mending by lamplight. She opened the door to find Elias standing in the swirling snow, his hat and shoulders white with it. "Miss Vale, sorry to disturb you so late. Is something wrong?" He shifted, and she noticed he was cradling his left arm oddly. "Had some trouble with a saddle? Thought you might take a look. If you're willing, it's my best one, and I need it for a hunting party tomorrow." "Of course. Come in before you freeze." He hesitated. "Might not be proper. Mr. Boone, Propriety and I parted ways somewhere outside of Nebraska. Come in." He entered, moving carefully. When he set the saddle on the kitchen table, Clara saw immediately why he'd come. This wasn't just a repair job. The leather was torn in multiple places, as if it had been dragged across rocks. "What happened?" "Horse spooked. Dragged me a piece before I could get loose." He said it matter-of-factly, but Clara noticed how he kept his left arm close to his body. "Let me see your arm." "It's fine." "The same fine as this saddle." She fixed him with a look that had quelled rowdy diners. "Sit." To her surprise, he sat. Clara carefully helped him remove his coat, trying not to notice how he winced. His shirt sleeve was torn and bloody. "This needs cleaning," she said, her voice carefully neutral, though her heart had quickened at the sight. "Wait here." She fetched water, clean cloths, and the medical supplies Mrs. Hart kept for kitchen accidents. Elias watched her preparations with something like amusement. "You've done this before." 3 younger brothers who thought trees were meant for climbing and rules were meant for breaking. She began cleaning the wound, a long scrape, painful but not deep. This might sting. He didn't flinch as she worked, though she felt the tension in his arm. The kitchen was quiet, except for the wind outside and the occasional pop from the dying fire. Clara found herself oddly aware of small details, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the calluses on his hands, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "There," she said finally, tying off the bandage. "Try not to tear it open again." "Yes, ma'am." There was a hint of smile in his voice. He watched as she turned her attention to the saddle, examining the damage with professional interest. "Can it be saved?" "Everything can be saved with enough patience and the right thread." She pulled her sewing basket closer. "Though this will take some time." "I'll pay extra for the rush." "No need. You helped me when I had nothing to offer in return." She threaded a heavy needle, one meant for leather work. "Besides, I've been curious about this saddle. The tooling is beautiful." "Mexican. My father's. He rode with a vaquero crew in California before coming north." Elias traced one of the decorative patterns with his finger. "Taught me everything about horses, tracking, reading the land. Is he still in California? Died when I was 15. Hunting accident. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But his hand still rested gently on the leather, as if touching memory itself. They sat in companionable quiet while Clara worked. The repair was complex, requiring her to recreate some of the decorative stitching. Elias watched her hands move with the same focused attention he might give to tracking sign. "You're different from what I expected," he said suddenly. Clara looked up. "What did you expect?" "When I found you in that warehouse." He paused, choosing words. "Most women would have been in tears. Hysterical. You were half frozen and alone, and you looked at me like you were calculating whether you could take me in a fight if needed. Could I have? Probably not, but you'd have tried." Clara smiled despite herself. "My father always said I was too stubborn to know when I was beaten." "Stubborn's not the word I'd use." "Oh, what word would you use?" He thought for a moment. "Resilient, like a pine tree that bends in the storm but doesn't break." Clara felt heat rise in her neck and focused intently on her stitching. Trees don't have feelings to hurt or reputations to lose. No, but they endure, and they grow stronger for the weathering. The needle slipped, pricking her finger. She pulled back instinctively, and a drop of blood welled up. "Here." Elias pulled out a clean handkerchief, reached for her hand, then stopped. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He took her hand carefully, as if it were made of spun glass, and wrapped the handkerchief around her finger. His hands were warm, calloused but gentle, and Clara found herself acutely aware of every point of contact. "There," he said softly, but didn't immediately release her hand. They sat frozen for a moment, the kitchen suddenly feeling too small, too warm despite the cold night outside. Clara pulled back first. "I should the saddle?" "Of course." He stood abruptly. "I should go. It's late, and you have early mornings." "But the saddle?" "I'll come back for it tomorrow, if that's all right." "Yes, after the dinner rush would be best." He collected his coat, favoring his injured arm. At the door, he turned back. "Miss Vale, Clara, thank you. For this, for..." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the bandage, the partially mended saddle, the quiet kitchen. Something unspoken. "Just thank you." "Elias," she said, using his given name for the first time. "You're welcome." After he left, Clara sat for a long time in the kitchen, the saddle before her, his handkerchief still wrapped around her finger. She thought about hands again, how they could hurt or heal, take or give, push away or draw close. Tomorrow the town would talk if they learned he'd been here. Let them talk. She had work to do. She picked up the needle and continued stitching, each loop and pull bringing the torn pieces back together, making something broken whole again. It was good work, careful work, the kind that required patience and skill and something like faith that the right hands could mend what seemed beyond repair. The next evening, true to his word, Ellis returned. This time he came to the front door during the dinner hour. Like any other customer, he ordered the daily special and ate quietly while Clara served other tables, aware of his presence like a warm spot in a cold room. When the rush ended and the other diners departed, he remained Mrs. Hart looked between them, then announced she had accounts to settle in her room, leaving them alone with a meaningful look at Clara. Clara brought the repaired saddle from the back room. "Good as I could make it. The decorative stitching isn't exactly the same, but..." "It's perfect." He ran his hands over the repairs, and she could see genuine pleasure in his eyes. "Better than perfect. You've added to its story." "Everything has a story, I suppose." "Yes." He looked at her directly then. "I'd like to know yours. All of it, if you're willing to tell it." Clara sat down across from him, the repaired saddle between them like a bridge. "It's not a very interesting story." "I doubt that." So she told him. About growing up in Boston, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. About being too tall, too strong, too much. About the years in the textile mill after her parents died. The small room she shared with 3 other girls. The marriage proposals from men who saw her as a workhorse or a curiosity. About the advertisement for the matchmaking agency. The hope it offered. The careful letters from Owen Mather who seemed to see her as she wished to be seen. I was a fool, she concluded, believing words on paper from a man I'd never met. Not a fool. Hopeful. There's a difference. Is there? A fool keeps making the same mistake. You learned, adapted, survived, found work, made a place for yourself. He paused. That's not foolish. That's brave. Clara laughed, but it came out shaky. Brave is not the word I'd use. Oh, what word would you use? She thought of cold nights in the warehouse, of Frank's fingers on her wrist, of every whispered comment and sly suggestion. Desperate. Can't it be both? His voice was gentle. Bravery isn't the absence of desperation. It's moving forward despite it. The lamp flame flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, she could hear the town settling into evening horses being stabled, shops closing, the saloon piano starting its nightly repertoire. Your turn, Clara said. I've told my story. Elias leaned back, his face half in shadow. Not much to tell. Born here in Montana. Learned hunting and tracking from my father. Took over his business when he died. Met Sarah when I was 20. She was the school teacher's daughter. We married, built the cabin, had a daughter, Rose. She was 3 when the fever came. His voice remained steady, but Clara saw the tightness around his eyes. Lost them both in the same week. That was 3 years ago. Been living half a life since then. Work, eat, sleep, exist. Elias. Until I found a half-frozen woman in a warehouse who looked at me like she was ready to fight the whole world if needed. He met her eyes. Made me remember what it felt like to see someone. Really see them. Not just look through them like I've been doing. The words hung between them like a physical presence. Clara felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see through her carefully constructed armor to the loneliness beneath. I should pay you for the repair, he said, reaching for his wallet. No. Clara, friends don't pay friends for favors. The word friends felt both too small and too large for what was growing between them. Is that what we are, friends? She considered the question seriously. I don't know what we are, but I know you're the first person in this town to offer help without wanting something in return. That's worth more than payment for mending leather. He stood, collecting the saddle carefully. Walk with me. It wasn't proper for an unmarried woman to walk with a man after dark, but then nothing about her situation was proper. She fetched her cloak. They walked through the quiet streets, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Fresh snow was falling, muffling their footsteps. Elias led her to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The mountains loomed dark against the starlit sky. See that peak? He pointed to a distant summit. First thing I see every morning. Sarah used to say it looked like God's thumbprint, pressing down to keep the earth in place. She sounds like she was special. She was, but memories can become chains if you let them. He turned to her. I'm trying to let them be what they are, part of my past, not my whole future. Clara understood. She had her own chains, failed expectations, disappointed hopes, the weight of being always too much or not enough. It's hard, isn't it, deciding which parts of the past to carry forward and which to leave behind? Yes. He stepped closer, and she could see snowflakes catching in his dark hair. But easier when you're not doing it alone. For a moment, Clara thought he might kiss her. The possibility hung in the air between them like held breath. Then a door slammed somewhere in town, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. I should get you back, he said. Mrs. Hart will worry. They walked back in comfortable silence. At the kitchen door, Elias paused. There's a church social next Saturday. Potluck dinner, dancing after. Would you... He cleared his throat. Would you allow me to escort you? Clara thought of the whispers that would follow, the looks, the assumptions. Then she thought of his hand wrapping her pricked finger, his voice saying brave like he meant it. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. Saturday, then. I'll call for you at 6. After he left, Clara stood in the dark kitchen, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat a rapid rhythm. She thought of her mother's warnings about men and reputation, about keeping yourself safe and separate. But safety was an illusion she'd lost somewhere on the journey west, and separate was just another word for alone. Saturday was 5 days away. 5 days to finish the blue wool dress. 5 days to practice remembering how to hope without counting the cost. 5 days to decide what kind of story she wanted to tell next. She climbed the stairs to her small room, Elias's handkerchief still in her pocket, the memory of his careful hands lingering like warmth in the cold night. Tomorrow would bring its usual challenges: the breakfast rush, the whispers, the work that never ended. But tonight, for the first time since arriving in Dry Pine, Clara Vale fell asleep thinking not of what she'd lost, but of what she might yet find. The morning after Elias's invitation, Clara woke to find Mrs. Hart already in the kitchen, kneading bread with more vigor than usual. The widow glanced up as Clara entered, her expression unreadable. "Sleep well, Mrs.?" Hart asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Well enough." The widow punched down the dough. "Heard Elias Boone was here late last night, then heard you two went walking." Clara tied on her apron, keeping her face neutral. "He needed saddle repair, then we talked a bit." "Talked?" Another punch to the dough. "Also heard he's taking you to the church social Saturday." News travels fast in this town. Faster than wildfire in dry grass. Mrs. Hart shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. "Clara, sit down a minute." Clara sat, wary of the serious tone. "I like you, girl. You work hard. Don't complain. Handle the rough customers without losing your dignity. But Elias Boone..." She paused, choosing words carefully. "That man's been walking around half dead for 3 years. Now suddenly he's coming to dinner, taking evening walks, asking ladies to socials. People notice, people talk. Let them talk." Easy to say when you've only been here a month. This town has a long memory and sharp teeth. They'll paint you as a fortune hunter, a loose woman taking advantage of a grieving widower. Clara's spine stiffened. "I've taken nothing from him." "I know that. You know that. He knows that. But Martha Pritchard and her sewing circle Frank and his drinking buddies, they'll see what they want to see." Mrs. Hart's expression softened. "I'm not saying don't go. Lord knows that man deserves some happiness. Just be careful, both of you." Clara nodded, understanding the warning even as she chose to set it aside. She had been careful her whole life, and where had it gotten her alone in a warehouse, freezing, with nothing but broken promises to keep her warm? The breakfast rush came as always. Clara served and cleared and smiled politely, but her mind kept drifting to Saturday, to the blue wool dress taking shape in her room, to the way Elias had said her name like it was something worth holding. That afternoon, during the lull between lunch and dinner, young Tommy Chen burst through the door. The telegraph operator's son was usually cheerful, but his face was tight with worry. "Miss Clara Pa sent me. Mr. Boone's horse came back without him. Pa thinks something happened out at Elk Ridge." Clara's hands stilled on the plate she was washing. "When did he leave?" "Early morning. Pa said, tracking a wounded elk for the Murphy party. Horse showed up an hour ago, saddle askew, reins torn." Mrs. Hart emerged from the pantry. "Could be the horse just got spooked and threw him." "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said. "Except there was blood on the saddle. Pa's getting a search party together." Clara was already untying her apron. "I'm going with them." "Clara, no." "Mrs." Hart protested. "That's rough country, and if he's hurt, then he needs help." She grabbed her cloak. "Which way is Elk Ridge?" "North, past the old mine. But Miss Clara, you can't just—" She was already out the door. At the livery stable, she found Samuel Chen organizing 5 men, all armed, all grim-faced. They looked up in surprise as she approached. "Miss Vale, this isn't—" Samuel began. "I can ride, I can follow directions, and I have steady hands if he needs tending. You're wasting time arguing." Old Pete, the prospector, spat tobacco juice. "Let her come. Sam, we need all the eyes we can get, and she's got more spine than half the men in this town." Samuel reluctantly agreed, and soon they were riding hard toward Elk Ridge. The afternoon sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the snow. Clara had borrowed a horse from the livery, a steady mare who picked her way carefully through the drifts. They found the blood trail, first dark spots on white snow, leading up a rocky slope. Clara's heart constricted, but she kept her face calm. The men spread out, calling Elias's name, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. It was Clara who spotted the disturbed snow near a cluster of boulders. "Here," she called, sliding from her horse. Elias lay wedged between 2 rocks, his face pale, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle. Blood had pooled beneath him, staining the snow crimson, but his chest rose and fell. He was alive. "Careful," Samuel warned as Clara scrambled down to reach him. "Could have other injuries." Clara ignored him, focusing on Elias's still face. "Elias, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, and he made a sound that might have been her name. "Don't try to move," she said, her hands already assessing the damage. The leg was clearly broken, and there was a gash on his temple that had bled freely. But his breathing was steady, his pulse strong. "We're going to get you home." The men rigged a travois using pine branches and blankets. Clara stayed by Elias's head as they carefully moved him, talking steadily to keep him conscious. "You picked a terrible time to go flying off horses," she told him. "Saturday's only 4 days away. If you think a broken leg gets you out of taking me to that social, you're mistaken." His lips quirked slightly. "Stubborn," he mumbled. "So you keep telling me." The journey back to town was agonizing. Every bump and jostle drew groans from Elias, though he tried to muffle them. Clara walked beside the travois, one hand on his shoulder, offering what comfort she could. Dr. Marcus Wells was waiting when they arrived, alerted by Tommy's quick feet. He was a competent man, trained back east, with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner. He took one look at Elias and began barking orders. "Get him to my surgery. Carefully, Miss Vale. I'll need your help. The rest of you, wait outside." The next hours blurred together, setting the broken bone while Elias bit down on a leather strap, cleaning and stitching the head wound, checking for internal injuries. Through it all, Clara assisted with steady hands, following the doctor's instructions without question. "You've done this before," Dr. Wells observed as she tied off a bandage. "My father worked construction. Accidents happened." When they finally finished, Elias was unconscious but stable, his legs splinted and his wounds dressed. "Doctor," Wells wiped his hands on a towel, looking exhausted. "He'll live," he said, "but that leg will take months to heal properly. He'll need constant care for at least the first few weeks." "He lives alone," Samuel Chen said from the doorway. "Got no family to tend him." Clara made a decision that would have shocked her proper Boston self. "He'll stay at Mrs. Hart's. We have the space, and I can help with his care." The men exchanged glances, and Clara knew what they were thinking. But Dr. Wells nodded approvingly. That would be best. Moving him to that cabin of his would be dangerous. Mrs. Hart runs a respectable establishment, and Miss Vale clearly has the skills needed. It was settled. They carried Elias to the boarding house, where Mrs. Hart had already prepared her own ground-floor room, moving herself upstairs without complaint. "Man saved your life," she told Clara simply. "Least we can do is save his." Elias drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. Clara tended him between her kitchen duties, spooning broth between his lips, changing bandages, monitoring his fever. She read to him from her mother's Bible, the only book she had, choosing psalms about green pastures and still waters. On the 3rd morning, she entered with fresh bandages to find him fully awake, watching the door. "You're here," he said, voice rough with disuse. "Where else would I be?" She set down the supplies, businesslike. "How's the pain?" "Manageable, Clara." "Don't." She began unwrapping the old bandage on his head. "Don't apologize for inconveniencing us. Don't worry about propriety. Don't argue about staying here. Just heal." His hand caught hers, stilling her movements. "I was going to say thank you." She looked down at their joined hands. His fingers were warm, calloused, familiar now. "You're welcome." "Also," he continued, a hint of his old humor returning, "I believe we have a social to attend, though I might not be much for dancing." Clara laughed, surprising herself. "Elias Boone, you nearly die falling off a mountain, and you're worried about dancing." "A man has priorities. I finally asked the prettiest woman in Dry Pine to accompany me somewhere. I'm not missing it." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Prettiest, have you seen Martha Pritchard's daughter? She's like a China doll." "China dolls break too easy." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I prefer someone with strength, someone who can haul a grown man out of a canyon and then serve breakfast the next morning without complaint." The men helped. "Samuel told me, said you spotted the blood trail first, climbed down those rocks like you were born to them. Said you didn't leave my side the whole way back." Clara focused on rewrapping his bandage. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said quietly. "They wouldn't have." A knock interrupted whatever might have been said next. Mrs. Hart entered with a tea tray, her sharp eyes taking in their still joined hands. Clara pulled away, busying herself with the medical supplies. "Mr. Boone," the widow said pleasantly. "Good to see you awake. Half the town's been asking after you." "Kind of them." "Indeed. Martha Pritchard even sent her special liniment. Though between you and me, it smells like something died in the bottle." She set down the tray with a clatter. "Clara, breakfast rush is starting." Clara recognized the dismissal. She gathered the old bandages, pausing at the door. "I'll check on you at lunch." Elias's eyes followed her. "I'll be here." As she served breakfast to the usual crowd, Clara noticed the change in how people looked at her, some with curiosity, some with disapproval, but many with something approaching respect. She'd ridden out with a search party, helped save a man's life, in a frontier town. Such things mattered. "Heard you played nurse," Tom Garrett said as she poured his coffee. "Boone's lucky you were there." Anyone would have helped. Maybe, but not everyone would have spotted that blood trail. "Sam Chen says you've got tracker's eyes." He left an extra dime beside his plate. The days fell into a new rhythm. Kitchen work, tending Elias, dodging questions and meaningful looks. The church social came and went. Clara spent the evening reading to Elias instead, and neither mentioned what might have been. But something had shifted between them, subtle as spring wind. The careful distance was gone, replaced by casual touches, her hand steadying him as he sat up, his fingers brushing hers when she handed him water. They talked during the quiet hours, sharing stories of childhood, of dreams deferred and losses endured. "Why did you really come west?" he asked one evening as she helped him exercise his healing leg. Clara considered the question. "I thought I was coming for Owen Mather, for marriage, security, a place to belong." She adjusted the pillow behind his knee. "But maybe I was really coming to find out who I am when everything familiar is stripped away." "And who are you?" She met his eyes. "I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm not the woman who left Boston. That woman would have cried in the warehouse, would have begged for help, would have accepted the first offer of protection, no matter the cost. What's this woman doing instead? Working, surviving, choosing her own path." She paused. "Falling in love with a stubborn cowboy who can't seem to stay on his horse." The words hung in the air like suspended breath. Elias reached for her hand, drew it to his lips, pressed a kiss to her palm. "Clara Vale," he said against her skin. "You are the strongest, bravest, most maddening woman I've ever known. And I thank God for whatever brought you to that warehouse, because finding you there changed everything." She should pull away, should remember propriety and reputation and all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sure, tasting coffee and possibility on his lips. When they parted, he was smiling. Definitely worth falling off a mountain for that. "Don't make a habit of it," she warned. But she was smiling too. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside was warm with lamplight and something that felt dangerously like home. Clara knew the town would talk, knew there would be consequences for loving openly in a place that preferred its women meek and its men stoic. But as she sat beside Elias, their hands entwined, watching the snow transform the world outside into something clean and new, Clara found she didn't care. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to find a life that didn't exist. Instead, she'd found something better, a chance to build a life of her own choosing, with a man who saw her strength as beauty, her stubbornness as grace. The future stretched uncertain before them. But for now, this was enough: the warmth of the fire, the peaceful silence, and the knowledge that sometimes the best journeys were the ones that led you where you never meant to go. The kiss changed everything and nothing. Clara still rose before dawn to start the kitchen fires. Elias still lay healing in Mrs. Hart's ground floor room. The town still whispered. But now there was a current between them, electric and undeniable, that made even the simplest interactions feel charged with meaning. Word spread, as word always did in Dry Pine. Clara had kissed the injured cowboy. Right there in Mrs. Hart's respectable boarding house, the sewing circle clucked their tongues. The men at the saloon made crude jokes, but Clara found their disapproval had lost its sting. "Let them talk," Mrs. Hart said one morning, kneading bread with particular violence. "Half those biddies were married with child before their wedding day. Just because they've forgotten what it's like to feel something real doesn't mean you should." It was 2 weeks after the accident when Elias first managed to stand with crutches. Clara was changing his bandages when he suddenly gripped the bed frame and hauled himself upright. "Elias, no, the doctor said—" "The doctor said 2 weeks before I could try. It's been 2 weeks." His face was pale with effort, but determined. "I need to do this. Clara, can't lie in this bed forever." She knew better than to argue with that tone. Instead, she fetched the crutches doctor. Wells had left and helped him position them. His first steps were shaky, sweat beading on his forehead, but he managed to cross to the window and back before his strength gave out. "There," he said, breathless but triumphant. "Still vertical." "Barely." But she was smiling as she helped him back to bed. "Tomorrow we'll try the hallway." Each day brought small victories. First the hallway, then the kitchen, then a full circuit of the boarding house. Clara walked beside him, ready to catch him if he faltered, offering encouragement and the occasional sharp word when he pushed too hard. It was during one of these walks that they encountered Martha Pritchard and her daughter, Catherine, coming from the mercantile. Catherine was indeed like a china doll petite, blonde, with delicate features and clothes that had never seen hard work. Mr. Boone," Martha said, her voice dripping false concern. "How wonderful to see you recovering. Though I must say, I'm surprised Miss Vale allows you to exert yourself so." "Miss Vale," Elias said evenly, "knows I'm not made of glass." Martha's eyes narrowed. Indeed. Miss Vale seems to know quite a lot about what you're made of. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I know he's made of determination and grit. Mrs. Pritchard. Qualities I admire. How rustic. Martha pulled her daughter closer. Come, Catherine. We mustn't keep Miss Vale from her. Nursing duties. After they passed, Elias said quietly, I'm sorry about that. For what you didn't say anything. For what she implied. About you. About us. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Clara, I won't have your reputation ruined because of me. My reputation, Clara laughed, but it came out bitter. Elias, my reputation was ruined the moment I stepped off that stagecoach alone. I'm the woman who came west for a man who didn't exist, who slept in a warehouse, who works in a kitchen and mends leather for extra money. Martha Pritchard decided who I was long before you kissed me. Then let me court you properly, publicly. Let them see this is real, not some what desperate woman taking advantage of an injured man. Clara shook her head. It doesn't matter what we do. Elias, they'll see what they want to see. He caught her hand. Then what do you want them to see? Clara considered the question. What did she want? The safe answer was respectability, acceptance, a place in the town's social order. But safety was an illusion she'd left in Boston. The truth, she said finally. That I'm falling in love with you. That you make me want to be brave. That when I'm with you, I don't feel too tall or too strong or too much of anything. I just feel right. Elias pulled her closer, mindful of his crutches. You are right. Perfect. Anyone who can't see that is blind. Including the whole town. Especially the whole town. He pressed his forehead to hers. Clara Vale, I don't care if every gossip from here to Helena talks about us. I care that you're here, that you stayed, that you see me as more than a broken man mourning his past. And you see me as more than a desperate spinster with nowhere else to go. I see you, he said simply, as everything. They were still standing close when the boarding house door burst open. Tommy Chen ran out, eyes wide with excitement. Miss Clara, Mr. Boone Pa sent me there's a man at the telegraph office asking about you. Clara's blood chilled. Asking about me? Yes'm. Says his name is Owen Mather. Says he's come to claim his bride. The crutch slipped from Elias's hand, and Clara had to steady him. Her mind raced. Owen Mather. The name from the letters. The phantom who'd lured her west. But how could he be real now? After all this time? We should go, Elias said, his voice carefully neutral. Find out what he wants. They made their way to the telegraph office. Clara acutely aware of every eye that followed them. Word had already spread the mysterious Owen Mather had materialized. Come for the woman who'd been publicly courting Elias Boone. The telegraph office was crowded with curious townspeople. In the center stood a man who looked exactly as Clara had imagined from his letter's medium height, neat brown beard, clothes that spoke of money and education. He turned as they entered, and his face lit up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. Clara, Miss Clara Vale. He stepped forward, hands extended. My dear, I'm so relieved to find you safe. I cannot begin to apologize for the confusion. Clara didn't take his hands. Mr. Mather, I presume. Yes, Owen Mather. He looked around at the gathered crowd with slight distaste. Perhaps we could speak privately. I can explain everything. No, Clara said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say here. These people have been more family to me than you ever were, despite your pretty letters. Owen's expression tightened, but he nodded. Very well. I was delayed in California business matters that couldn't be avoided. I sent word to the boarding house where you were to stay, but the message must have gone astray. When I finally arrived last week, I was horrified to learn of your circumstances. Last week, Elias's voice was dangerously quiet. You've been in town a week. Yes, I needed time to assess the situation, to understand what had transpired. Owen's eyes flicked between Clara and Elias. I see now that Miss Vale has made other arrangements. What I've made, Clara said, is a life without you. Without your promises or your ranch that nobody seems to know about. The ranch is real, Owen protested. 20 miles north, near Copper Creek. I can show you the deed. Clara, please. I know I've handled this badly. But I'm here now. We can still have the life we planned. Clara studied him, this stranger who'd haunted her thoughts for months, whose words had brought her across a continent. He was handsome enough, well-spoken, probably kind in his way. Everything the matchmaking agency had promised. And she felt nothing. No, she said simply. I beg your pardon? No, we can't have the life we planned because that life was built on letters and loneliness. I'm not that woman anymore, the one so desperate for belonging that she'd marry a stranger. She felt Elias shift beside her, a solid, reassuring presence. I've found work here, friends, a place. I've found a protector. Owen's tone turned ugly. Yes, I've heard all about your arrangement with Mr. Boone. How convenient that you found shelter so quickly. Elias moved forward, but Clara put a hand on his arm. This was her fight. What I found, she said, voice ringing clear, was a man who saw me freezing and offered warmth without conditions, who respected my work and my worth, who treats me as an equal, not a mail-order solution to his loneliness. Clara, be reasonable. You came west to marry me. I'm here now, offering you exactly what was promised. A home, security, respectability. Respectability, Clara laughed. Mr. Mather, I serve breakfast to miners. I mend leather for cowboys. I help pull a man off a mountain. I've been called desperate and worse by people who don't know me. Your respectability comes too late and offers too little. Owen's face flushed. And what does he offer a crippled hunter with a dead wife's ghost in every corner of his cabin? The crowd gasped. Elias went rigid beside her, and Clara felt fury rise in her chest like fire. He offers truth, she said, stepping forward. He offers partnership. He offers a love built on knowing each other's scars and choosing to heal together. You offer a business arrangement dressed up as romance. You're making a mistake, Owen said coldly, choosing poverty and gossip over the life you traveled 2,000 miles to find. No, Clara said. The mistake was believing that life existed in the first place. The journey wasn't wasted, though. It brought me here, to this place, these people, this man. She took Elias's hand publicly, definitively. This real, imperfect, extraordinary life. Owen looked between them, his expression cycling through anger, disappointment, and something like resignation. I see. Well, I suppose there's nothing more to say. He turned to leave, then paused. The agency will want their fee returned. They can want all they like. Clara said, I delivered my end of the bargain. You're the one who failed to appear. He left without another word, the crowd parting to let him pass. As the door closed behind him, the telegraph office erupted in voices: shock, approval, scandal, everything mixed together. But Clara heard none of it. She was looking at Elias, who was staring at her with something like awe. You chose this, he said quietly. You chose us. I chose myself, she corrected. And I choose you, if you'll have me, gossip and all. Instead of answering, he dropped one crutch, cupped her face with his free hand, and kissed her soundly in front of half the town. When they parted, the crowd was silent. Then old Pete started clapping. About time, he hollered. Been watching you two dance around each other like nervous colts. Others joined in Samuel Chen, Tommy, even Sour Mrs. Harriet from the first boarding house managed a tight smile. Not everyone approved. Clara could see that. Martha Pritchard looked ready to combust. and several others wore expressions of scandal. But Mrs. Hart pushed through the crowd, beaming. "Well," she announced, "I suppose I'd better start planning a wedding feast. Can't have my best cook getting married without proper celebration." "Now wait a minute," Elias started, but Clara squeezed his hand. "She's right," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "If we're going to shock the town, might as well do it properly. Elias Boone, will you marry me?" The crowd gasped again. Women didn't propose. It simply wasn't done. But Elias was grinning now, wide and genuine. "Clara Vale, you impossible woman. Yes, though I believe I'm supposed to ask you." "Too late. I asked first." She turned to the crowd. "You're all witnesses. He said yes." "She's right," Samuel Chen said, fighting a smile. "We all heard it, though I'm not sure it's legal if the woman asks." "Legal enough for me," Elias said. "Doc Wells, how long before I can stand at the altar without these crutches?" 6 weeks, minimum," the doctor called from the back. 8 would be better. 6 weeks, then, Clara decided. First Sunday in May. And just like that, the scandal transformed into news of a different sort. An engagement, a spring wedding, something to plan for, gossip about, anticipate. The crowd began to disperse, full of opinions and advice. Owen Mather was forgotten before he'd even left town, a footnote in a story that had moved beyond him. Clara had traveled west for one life and found another, messier, harder, infinitely more real than anything promised in a letter. As they made their slow way back to the boarding house, Elias leaning on her as much as his remaining crutch, he said, "You know this won't stop the talk. Might make it worse." "Let them talk," Clara said. "We'll be too busy living to listen." The weeks following the proposal brought a whirlwind of activity to Mrs. Hart's boarding house, true to her word. The widow threw herself into wedding preparations with military precision, while Clara juggled her kitchen duties with an endless stream of decisions about flowers, food, and propriety. But it was the quiet evenings that Clara treasured most. After the dinner rush, when the dishes were done and the kitchen cleaned, she would sit with Elias in the parlor, working on her sewing while he practiced walking without the crutches. These hours were theirs alone, filled with comfortable silences and conversations that wandered like mountain streams. One such evening, 3 weeks before the wedding, Clara was struggling with the hem of her wedding dress not white, for she was too practical for that, but a soft dove gray that would serve for Sundays after. Elias watched her work, his leg propped on a footstool. "You're frowning," he observed. "This hem won't lie straight. I've redone it 3 times. "Clara," his voice was gentle, "what's really troubling you?" She set down the needle with a sigh. "I received a letter today from my aunt in Boston." Elias waited, knowing she would continue when ready. She's heard about my situation, about us. Someone, probably the matchmaking agency, wrote to her." Clara smoothed the gray fabric absently. "She says I'm a disgrace to my mother's memory, that I've thrown away my reputation for a frontier dalliance, that no decent man would have me now." "She's wrong." "Is she?" Clara looked up at him. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish. Elias, you had a good life with Sarah, a proper wife who knew her place, kept a tidy home, gave you a child, and now you're binding yourself to a woman who proposes marriage in public and can't even hem a dress properly." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, thoughtful. "Do you want to know what my life with Sarah was really like?" Clara nodded. "It was expected. We married because it was time, because our families approved, because that's what people did. She was sweet, kind, everything a wife should be, and I cared for her. But Clara—" He leaned forward, capturing her hands. "We never talked like you and I talk. Never challenged each other, never fought or laughed or sat in comfortable silence just being ourselves. It was a good life, but it was like like a photograph, pretty, proper, and flat. Elias, you're not Sarah. Thank God for that. His hands tightened on hers. You're difficult and stubborn, and you speak your mind when you should probably stay quiet. You work too hard and care too little about what people think. You're nothing like what I thought I wanted. He smiled. You're everything I never knew I needed. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not good at being soft. I don't want soft. Soft doesn't survive out here. He pulled her closer, until she was sitting beside him on the small sofa. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who crossed a continent on a promise, faced betrayal, and built a new life with her bare hands. I see someone who hauled me out of a canyon and mended my father's saddle with reverent fingers. I see strength and grace and a kind of beauty that has nothing to do with China doll features. You're romanticizing. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in 3 years. He cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Sarah fit into my life without changing it. You've torn it apart and rebuilt it into something I didn't know I could have. So yes, your aunt is wrong, and if she can't see what an extraordinary woman her niece has become, that's her loss. Clara kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love and remaining fears into the connection. When they parted, she whispered, I'm still not good at being a proper wife. Good thing I'm not looking for a proper wife then. Just you, Clara, exactly as you are. They were interrupted by Mrs. Hart bustling in with tea and a knowing look. Not to intrude on the lovebirds, but we have a problem. The church roof leaked during the last storm. Reverend Morrison says it won't be repaired in time for the wedding. Clara's heart sank. The church was the only respectable place for a wedding in Dry Pine. Without it, we could delay, Elias suggested, though his expression showed how little he liked the idea. Or, Mrs. Hart said slowly, we could use the town hall. It's not traditional, but it's perfect, Clara interrupted. The town hall is where the real life of Dry Pine happens. Town meetings, dances, celebrations. If we're going to scandalize everyone anyway, might as well do it somewhere that matters. Mrs. Hart beamed. That's my practical girl. I'll speak to Mayor Hutchins in the morning. As the widow left, Elias said, You're sure your aunt already thinks you're throwing away propriety? My aunt isn't marrying you. I am. Clara picked up her sewing again, suddenly determined to get that hem right. Besides, I'd marry you in that warehouse where you found me if I had to. The location doesn't matter. Only the promise does. The next morning brought new challenges. Clara was serving breakfast when Martha Pritchard swept in with Catherine and 2 other ladies from the sewing circle. They took a prominent table, their expressions promising trouble. Coffee, ladies? Clara asked pleasantly. Just tea, Martha said. We're here on business. Actually, about the wedding. Clara's spine stiffened, but she kept her voice even. Oh. Yes, as prominent members of the church auxiliary, we feel it's our duty to express our concerns about this event taking place in the town hall. It's simply not done. Marriage is a sacred institution, not a barn dance. I appreciate your concern, Clara said, pouring tea with steady hands. But the decision is made. Is it? Martha's smile was sharp. Because I've been speaking with other concerned citizens, the town hall is public property. Its use requires broad community support. What are you saying, Mrs. Pritchard? I'm saying that many of us feel uncomfortable with such an unconventional union being celebrated in our community space. A woman who arrives under questionable circumstances, takes up with a man while supposedly engaged to another, proposes marriage in public. She tisked. What kind of example does that set for our young ladies? Catherine blushed prettily at the mention. And Clara understood suddenly. Martha had hoped to match her daughter with Elias, a respectable widower with property. Perfect for a China doll bride. An example of survival, Clara said quietly. Of making hard choices and living with the consequences. of building love from friendship and respect rather than accepting the first offer of security. She looked directly at Catherine. I'd say that's exactly the example young ladies need. Before Martha could retort, the door opened and Samuel Chen entered with several other men, Tom Garrett, Old Pete, even Frank looking somewhat sheepish. Morning, Miss Clara, Samuel said. We heard there was some discussion about the wedding venue. Wanted to add our voice. The town hall seems fitting to us. You and Boone are part of this community now. We're better to celebrate. This is hardly your concern, Martha snapped. Community decisions are everyone's concern, Tom said mildly. And I recall you using the hall for Catherine's birthday dance last year. Don't remember anyone questioning the propriety then. More people entered Dr. Wells and his wife. The Murphy family Elias had been hunting for when injured. Other regular customers. Soon, the dining room was full of voices debating tradition versus acceptance, propriety versus compassion. Clara watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and dismay. This was her wedding they were arguing over, her life they were dissecting. She was about to speak when a familiar thump step sounded from the kitchen door. Elias entered, still using one crutch but walking more strongly each day. He took in the scene, the divided room, Martha's triumphant expression, Clara's carefully neutral face and his jaw set. Mrs. Pritchard, he said, voice carrying clearly. I hear you have concerns about our wedding location. Mr. Boone, surely you understand. I understand that you're upset because Clara isn't the kind of woman you'd have chosen for me. His tone was conversational, but steel underlay the words. Too tall, too strong, too independent. Not from here, not meek enough, not Sarah. Martha had the grace to flush. I never said. You didn't have to. Elias moved to stand beside Clara, his free hand finding hers. But here's what you don't understand. Clara is exactly what this town needs. What I need. She works harder than any two people I know. She faces hardship without whining. She sees people for who they are, not who she thinks they should be. He looked around the room, meeting eyes. How many of you has she served without judgment? How many of your children has she slipped extra bread when you were short on payment? How many of you watched her ride out to find me on that mountain without hesitation? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara squeezed his hand, throat tight with emotion. As for the town hall, Elias continued, it seems fitting to me. That's where this community comes together, where we make decisions, celebrate harvests, mourn losses. Clara and I aren't just getting married. We're joining this community as a family. Where better to do that than the heart of Dry Pine? Old Pete broke the silence with a cackle. Boy's got a point. Besides, I've been to too many stuffy church weddings. At least at the hall we can have proper music and dancing after. Dancing, someone asked. At a wedding. Why not, Mrs.? Hart appeared from the kitchen, flour still on her apron, but fire in her eyes. We're frontier people, not Boston society. We make our own traditions. I say we give these two a wedding. Dry Pine will remember food, music, dancing, and all the joy we can muster. The tide turned then. People began volunteering. The Murphys would provide venison. Tom's wife would handle flowers. Samuel knew a fiddler from the mining camp. Even some who'd been silent offered tentative help. Martha Pritchard stood abruptly. I see we're abandoning all sense of propriety. Very well. But don't expect the respectable families to attend such a spectacle. She swept out, Catherine and her allies trailing behind. In the sudden quiet, Clara said, Well, I suppose that's that. Good riddance, Mrs. Hart muttered. Woman's been a thorn in my side for years. Now, let's talk about the real issue, food. I'm thinking roast venison, potatoes, spring greens if we can find them. The crowd gradually dispersed, plans forming, sides clearly drawn. Clara knew there would be consequences. The respectable families would shun them. Certain doors would close, but looking around at the faces of those who remained working people, Survivors. The backbone of Dry Pine. She found she didn't care. That evening, as she and Elias sat on the boarding house porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, he said, "You could have smoothed things over. Agreed to wait for the church, been more traditional. Made life easier." "I'm not very good at easy," Clara admitted. "No," he agreed, pulling her closer. "But you're excellent at real, at true, at brave. Is that enough?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "It's everything." 3 weeks later, on a warm May morning, Clara stood in her dove-gray dress in the town hall, surrounded by wildflowers and the faces of people who'd chosen acceptance over propriety. Elias waited at the front, standing straight without crutches, though she knew his legs still pained him. As she walked down the aisle alone, for she belonged to no one but herself to give away, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperate woman who'd boarded a train in Boston seemed like a stranger now. That woman had been running toward a promise. This woman was walking toward a choice. Elias took her hands as she reached him, and in his eyes she saw reflected her own joy, nervousness, and absolute certainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be those who never accepted them, who whispered behind their backs, who waited for them to fail. But today, in this hall filled with the people who mattered, Clara Vale and Elias Boone made promises that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with truth. And when Reverend Morrison pronounced them married and Elias kissed her with thorough disregard for proper wedding restraint, the cheer that went up could be heard clear to the mountains. Later, as the fiddler played and couples danced where town meetings usually convened, Martha Pritchard's absence went unnoticed. Love, Clara learned, was like spring water. It found its own level, carved its own channels, and nourished what was willing to grow. The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of adjustment. Clara moved into Elias's cabin, bringing her few possessions and a determination to make the place a home again. The cabin bore the marks of a widower's existence, functional but joyless, clean but not warm. Sarah's things had been packed away, leaving empty spaces that seemed to echo with loss. "Change whatever you need," Elias told her that first morning, watching as she explored their home. "Make it yours, ours." But Clara moved carefully, respectfully. She added small touches, wildflowers in a mason jar, new curtains she'd sewn from fabric misses, Hart donated, her mother's Bible on the shelf. She didn't try to erase Sarah's memory, just make room for new ones alongside the old. They settled into a routine. Clara rose early to help Mrs. Hart with the breakfast rush. She'd insisted on keeping her position, both for the income and the connection to the life she'd built. Elias, still healing, worked on repairing hunting gear and planning for when he could guide again. Evenings they spent together, talking over simple suppers, planning improvements to the cabin, learning the rhythms of shared life. It was 3 weeks into their marriage when the first test came. Clara was walking back from town, arms full of supplies, when she heard the commotion shouts, the whinny of frightened horses. Rounding the bend, she saw a wagon overturned in the ditch, a woman trapped beneath it, and several men trying unsuccessfully to lift it. Without thinking, Clara dropped her packages and ran. The woman, she recognized her as Jenny Sullivan, wife of a miner, was conscious but pale, her leg bent at an ugly angle beneath the wagon's weight. "We need more leverage," Clara said, assessing the situation. "Tom, get that fence post. Frank, Samuel, when we lift, you pull her out, gentle as you can." The men, including Frank, who'd given her such trouble months ago, obeyed without question. Clara positioned herself at the wagon's corner, set her feet, and nodded. On 3, 1, 2, 3. They heaved. Clara felt the strain in every muscle, her dress tearing at the shoulder, but the wagon lifted. The men pulled Jenny free, and they lowered the wagon with a crash. Dr. Wells arrived within minutes, drawn by the commotion. As he tended to Jenny, Clara noticed the crowd that had gathered, including Martha Pritchard and her circle, who'd witnessed the entire rescue. That was impressive, someone said. It was Catherine Pritchard, looking at Clara with something like awe. I could never have helped lift that. You'd be surprised what you can do when needed, Clara replied, trying to catch her breath. Martha sniffed. Ladies don't engage in such physical displays. No, Clara agreed, examining her torn dress. I suppose they don't. Good thing I'm just a woman then, not a lady. Elias arrived then, moving faster than he should on his still healing leg. His eyes swept over her, the torn dress, the dirt, the defensive posture and understanding dawned. You all right? He asked quietly, reaching her side. Fine. Jenny needed help. He nodded, then turned to the crowd. Lucky thing my wife was here. Jenny might have lost that leg waiting for enough men to gather. Your wife seems to make a habit of dramatic rescues, Martha said acidly. Yes, Elias said simply. She does. It's one of the things I love about her. The word hung in the air. Love. He'd said it publicly, proudly, about a woman who stood sweating and dirty with a torn dress. Several women in Martha's circle exchanged glances. That evening, as Clara mended her dress, Elias said, You know you've given Martha more ammunition. Let her shoot. Jenny Sullivan kept her leg. He moved behind her chair, hands settling on her shoulders. You can't help yourself, can you? Seeing someone in trouble and diving in. Would you have me stand by and do nothing? Never. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Just be careful. I've grown quite attached to having you around. The incident with the wagon marked another shift. Some who'd been uncertain about Clara now nodded respectfully when they passed. Jenny Sullivan, once healed, became a vocal supporter. But Martha's faction grew more entrenched, speaking of unseemly behavior and bad influences. The tension came to a head 6 weeks after the wedding, during the July town celebration. The entire town gathered for food, games, and dancing. Clara had helped organize the food with Mrs. Hart, while Elias, finally free of his crutches though still favoring his leg, helped set up tables and decorations. The afternoon was going well, children racing in sack races, men competing at horseshoes, women gossiping over pie. Clara was refilling the lemonade when she heard the commotion by the horse corral. A child had climbed the fence and fallen inside Martha's nephew, Timothy, no more than 7. The horses, spooked by fireworks some fool had set off early, were milling nervously. The boy lay frozen with fear as hooves stamped dangerously close. Clara didn't remember moving. One moment she was holding the lemonade pitcher. The next she was over the fence, placing herself between the child and the nearest horse. She spoke low and steady, nonsense words meant to calm, while slowly backing toward Timothy. Don't move, she told him quietly. I'm going to pick you up. Stay very still. The horses were settling, responding to her calm voice. She reached Timothy, scooped him up, and turned only to find their path to the fence blocked by a particularly skittish mare. Easy, girl, Clara murmured, but the mare's eyes were white-rimmed with fear. One wrong move and those hooves would lash out. Then Elias was there, outside the fence, his voice joining hers in the low, calming tones he used with spooked animals. Together they guided the mare aside, creating an opening. Clara passed Timothy over the fence to waiting arms, then climbed over herself, legs shaking with delayed fear. Martha Pritchard pushed through the crowd, Timothy clinging to her skirts. Her face was white. Whether with fear or fury, Clara couldn't tell. You, Martha began, then stopped, swallowed, started again. You saved him. Anyone would have... No. Martha's voice was strange, almost wondering. Catherine was right there. She screamed. The men were trying to think of a plan, but you just went... Clara didn't know what to say. She was suddenly aware of everyone watching, the whole town, it seemed. gathered for celebration, now witnessing this strange confrontation. Martha straightened, seeming to come to a decision. "I owe you an apology, and a debt." "You owe me nothing." "I owe you my nephew's life." Martha looked around at her followers, then back at Clara. "I've been unkind, unfair. I looked at you and saw everything I was taught to disapprove of. But my sister's child is alive because you're exactly who you are." She extended her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. "I can't promise we'll be friends," Martha continued. "We're too different for that, but I can promise to stop actively making your life difficult. That seems the least I can do." It wasn't a warm reconciliation. It wasn't a sudden friendship. But it was a truce, witnessed by the entire town, and Clara knew the value of that. Later, as the sun set and the dancing began, Elias pulled her into his arms for a waltz. His leg was still stiff, but he moved with determination. "You realize what you did today?" he asked as they swayed. "Made a fool of myself climbing into a horse corral in my good dress." "You changed Martha Pritchard's mind. That's like moving a mountain with your bare hands." Clara laughed. "Timothy did that. I just happened to be there." "No." Elias spun her carefully, mindful of his leg. "You were exactly who you are, someone who acts when others hesitate, someone who protects without calculating the cost, someone brave enough to be herself even when the whole town is watching." "You make me sound much more noble than I am. I tell the truth about the woman I love." He pulled her closer. "Even if she insists on giving me heart failure by jumping into danger every few weeks, I'll try to limit it to monthly occurrences." "Much appreciated." They danced on, surrounded by their community, not all accepting, perhaps, but more understanding than before. Clara caught glimpses as they turned misses, Hart beaming like a proud mother, Samuel Chen teaching his son to dance, Jenny Sullivan walking carefully but walking, even Martha managing a civil nod when their eyes met. 6 months ago, Clara had stood alone in this town, desperate and freezing. Now she stood at its heart, not fully accepted perhaps, but respected, known, part of the fabric of Dry Pine whether everyone liked it or not. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked. "About belonging," Clara said. "How it's not about fitting in, but about finding your place even when you don't fit." Very philosophical. "I have my moments." She looked up at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that night in the warehouse. Really seeing me. Not just a problem to solve or an opportunity to exploit, but a person worth knowing." "Clara." He stopped dancing, cradled her face in his hands. "That night, I wasn't rescuing you. You were rescuing me, from the half-life I'd been living, from the safety of feeling nothing." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "You woke me up." She kissed him then, there in the middle of the dance floor with the whole town watching. Let them see, let them know. Love wasn't always proper or convenient or expected. Sometimes it was a tall woman and a broken man finding each other in the margins and building something new from the pieces. The fiddle music swelled. Other couples joined them on the floor, and the celebration continued into the night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, Elias's business to rebuild. Clara's continued work at the boarding house, the slow process of earning a place in a community that valued tradition. But tonight, under stars that seemed to shine with possibility, Clara danced with her husband and felt the solid ground of home beneath her feet. She'd traveled 2,000 miles looking for a life that didn't exist, and found instead one she couldn't have imagined harder and messier and more real than any promise in a letter. In the end, that's what love was, not the perfect fit of matched expectations, but the daily choice to see and be seen, to stand together against whatever came, to build something worth having from whatever materials life provided. And as Elias spun her one more time, his laugh mixing with hers in the warm night air, Clara knew she wouldn't trade this imperfect, extraordinary life for all the propriety in Boston. She was home. Autumn came to Montana like a painter working in gold and crimson, transforming the mountains into something that made Clara's heart catch every morning when she stepped outside. She'd been married 4 months now, and the cabin had become truly home quilts she'd made on the beds, preserves she'd put up lining the shelves, the smell of bread baking mixing with the wood smoke and leather that was essentially Elias. He was out with a hunting party, his first extended trip since the accident. Clara had packed his supplies with extra care, trying not to show her worry. His leg had healed well, but she'd seen him wince when the weather changed, favoring it on cold mornings. "Stop fussing," he'd told her the night before leaving, catching her adding yet another jar of liniment to his pack. "I've been doing this since I was 15. Not with a leg that was broken in 3 places." "Clara," he'd pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'll be careful, I promise." Now, 3 days into his 5-day trip. Clara tried to focus on her work at the boarding house. Mrs. Hart had promoted her to managing the kitchen, which meant earlier mornings but also better pay. They were saving now for improvements to the cabin, for the future they were carefully building. She was elbow deep in bread dough when Tommy Chen burst through the door. "Miss Clara, there's trouble at the Murphy place." Clara's hand stilled. The Murphys were the family Elias was guiding. "What kind of trouble?" "Fire their barn caught, and it's spreading to the house. Ma sent me to gather folks to help." Clara was already washing her hands. "Mrs. Hart, I need to—" "Go," the widow said, already reaching for her own cloak. "I'll follow with water buckets." Clara ran. The Murphy homestead was 2 miles outside town, and she could see the smoke rising black against the clear sky. Other townspeople were converging, some on horseback, some in wagons loaded with water barrels and buckets. The scene was chaos. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking toward the house where Mrs. Murphy was throwing belongings out windows while her older children formed a bucket brigade from the well. But Clara's eyes went immediately to Mr. Murphy, shouting frantically at the gathered men. My youngest, Katie. She was playing in the loft. The barn loft. Clara's blood went cold. Through the smoke and flame, she could see the loft window, and dear God, a small face pressed against it. The men were arguing about ladders, about whether the structure would hold, about water pressure, talking while a child remained trapped. Clara didn't remember deciding. She grabbed a blanket from the pile of rescued goods, dunked it in a water bucket, and wrapped it around herself. Then she was running toward the barn. "Clara, no!" someone shouted. It sounded like Samuel Chen. She ignored them. The main doors were impassable, but there was a side entrance the flames hadn't reached yet. She plunged through into a hell of smoke and heat. Her eyes streamed. Her lungs burned, but she could hear it crying from above. The loft ladder was still intact. Though charred, Clara tested it, found it would hold, and climbed. Each rung felt like it might give way, but she kept going, the wet blanket her only protection from the heat. Katie Murphy was huddled in the far corner, maybe 6 years old, too terrified to move. The flames were eating through the floor nearby, and Clara could hear the ominous crack of weakening beams. "Katie," she called, her voice rough with smoke. "I'm going to get you out." The girl just sobbed. Clara reached her, scooped her up, and turned back to the ladder only to find it consumed by flames that had spread with terrifying speed. The window. It was the only option. Clara kicked out the remaining glass. Ignoring the cuts on her legs, she could see people below, scrambling with something a wagon full of hay they were positioning beneath the window. "Jump!" someone yelled. "We'll catch you." Clara looked at the 20-foot drop, at the small girl clinging to her neck. No time to think. The floor beneath them groaned, started to buckle. She wrapped Katie in the wet blanket, held her tight, and jumped. The world spun. Smoke and sky and screaming voices. Then impact not hard ground but hay, and hands reaching to pull them to safety. Clara kept her body curled around Katie, taking the brunt of the landing. "I've got her, I've got her." That was Mrs. Murphy, sobbing as she pulled Katie from Clara's arms. Clara tried to sit up, coughing violently. Her dress was singed, her hair smoking, her legs bleeding from the glass. But Katie was alive. That was all that mattered. "You fool woman, doctor." Wells was there, checking her over with gentle but furious hands. "You could have been killed." The ladder gave way. Clara gasped between coughs. "Of course it gave way, the whole structure." He broke off, focusing on her injuries. "These cuts need cleaning, and your lungs, you've inhaled too much smoke." They got her to the Murphys' house, which they'd saved thanks to the bucket brigade. As doctor, Wells worked on her cuts. Clara became aware of the crowd gathered outside. It seemed the whole town had come. "Is she all right?" That was Martha Pritchard, of all people, actually sounding concerned. "She'll live, doctor," Wells said, "though why she insists on risking her neck every other month is beyond me." "Because that's who she is," said a new voice, and Clara's heart leapt. Elias pushed through the crowd, still in his trail clothes, his face haggard. He must have ridden hard when he saw the smoke. His eyes found hers, and she saw fear there, and fury, and overwhelming relief. "Elias," she started, but he was already beside her, his hands framing her face. "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't you dare apologize for being who you are. Just let me look at you. Let me see you're really all right." "I'm fine, singed and cut up, but fine." "You jumped out of a burning barn loft?" "There was hay." "Clara!" His voice broke on her name. "I can't lose you, not you too." She caught his hands. "You won't. I'm too stubborn to die. Remember." He laughed, or maybe sobbed, and pulled her against him, not caring about the audience or her sooty clothes. "When I saw that smoke, and then they told me you'd run into the barn. Katie's alive. That's what matters. You matter." He pulled back to look at her. "You matter to me more than my own life. Promise me you'll remember that next time you're calculating risks." "I promise to try." "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me." The crowd was dispersing now, the immediate crisis over. The Murphys had lost their barn but saved their house and, more importantly, their daughter. As Clara watched, little Katie broke free from her mother and ran to them. "Thank you," she whispered, throwing her small arms around Clara's neck. "You saved me." Clara held her carefully. "This precious life." "You're welcome, sweetheart." After Katie returned to her parents, Elias helped Clara stand. She winced, everything hurt, and her lungs still felt scorched. But she could walk, and that was enough. "Let's go home," Elias said. They were almost to their borrowed wagon when Mr. Murphy approached. He was a proud man, quiet, not given to displays of emotion, but his eyes were wet as he took Clara's hands. "There aren't words," he said simply. "What you did today, we can never repay that." "There's no debt," Clara said. "We're neighbors." "It's what neighbors do." "No," he said firmly. "It's what you do, what you've always done, from the moment you arrived in this town." He looked at Elias. "You married a rare woman, Boone, one who sees need and acts, regardless of the cost to herself." "I know," Elias said quietly. "Believe me, I know." The ride home was quiet. Clara leaned against Elias, exhausted and hurting, while he held the reins with one hand and kept the other arm around her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "You left your hunting party," Clara said. "The moment I saw the smoke, the Murphys can find another guide. I can't find another you." "I'm sorry I frightened you." "No, you're not." There was wry humor in his voice. "You're sorry I was frightened, but you're not sorry you saved that little girl. And that's one of the reasons I love you so desperately." They were home now, their cabin glowing warm in the twilight. Elias helped her down, holding her when her legs wobbled. Inside, he heated water for a bath, helped her wash the smoke and blood away, tended her cuts with hands that shook slightly. "I'm all right," she told him as he wrapped a bandage around a particularly deep gash. "Truly. I know, it's just—" He sat back on his heels, looking up at her. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd never feel that kind of fear again. The fear of losing someone who holds your whole heart. I thought I was safe from it." Clara touched his face gently. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. The fear, it's proof that I'm alive again, that I have something worth losing." He caught her hand, pressed it to his cheek. "You brought me back to life. Clara, every day with you is a gift I didn't expect to have. So yes, I'm terrified when you run into burning buildings. But I'm also so proud I could burst, because that's who you are, someone who saves people. Who saved me." "Elias, I love you," he said simply. "Every stubborn, brave, infuriating inch of you. And I'll spend the rest of my life thanking God for that warehouse, for that cold night, for whatever brought you to me." Clara pulled him up, kissed him with all the love and promise she could pour into the connection. When they parted, she whispered, "I love you too, for seeing me, for choosing me, for standing by me even when I scare you senseless." "Especially then," he corrected, and she laughed. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Clara thought about the strange path that had led her here. She'd come west looking for safety, for a predetermined life with a stranger. Instead, she'd found danger and choice and a love built on truth rather than pretense. Tomorrow the town would talk about the woman who leapt from burning buildings. Some would praise her courage, others would call her reckless. But here, in this cabin with this man, none of that mattered. "Elias," she said into the darkness. "Do you think I'll ever stop seeing someone in trouble and running toward them instead of away?" He was quiet for a moment, then pulled her closer. "I hope not. It's who you are. Just maybe check for ladders first next time." "I'll try." "Liar." She smiled against his chest. "Probably. Definitely. But that's all right. I knew what I was getting when I married you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "A woman who sees what needs doing and does it. A woman who chooses courage over comfort every time. My wild, brave Clara." "You're Clara," she agreed, and felt him smile. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of coming snow. Winter would be here soon, with its challenges and isolation. But inside was warmth and safety and love not the pale. Proper love she'd once imagined, but something fiercer and truer. And Clara knew, with the same bone-deep certainty that sent her running toward those who needed help, that this was worth every risk she'd taken to find it. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, blanketing dry pine in snow so deep it reached the cabin windows. Elias's hunting business slowed to a crawl. Few men wanted to venture into the mountains when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze breath in the air. But Clara kept busy at the boarding house, and their evenings were filled with the quiet contentment of shared warmth and companionship. It was a Tuesday morning in late January when everything changed. Clara was serving breakfast when Mayor Hutchins entered with a stranger, a man in an expensive coat with the bearing of someone used to getting his way. "Morning, Clara," the mayor said, but his usual friendliness seemed forced. "This is Mr. William Cragg from the Montana Land Company. He's interested in some local properties." Clara nodded politely and poured coffee. But something in the mayor's manner made her uneasy. She'd learned to read the undercurrents in dry pine, and right now they were running dark. Through the morning, she caught fragments of conversation. William Cragg was buying up land rights. He had backing from investors back east. He was particularly interested in properties north of town, where Elias's hunting grounds and cabin were located. By noon, Clara's unease had crystallized into real worry. She found Mrs. Hart in the kitchen. "I need to go home. Something's happening." The widow took one look at her face and nodded. Go. I'll manage here. Clara half ran, half slid through the snowy streets. She burst through the cabin door to find Elias at the table with papers spread before him, his face grim. William Cragg sat across from him, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. Ah, Cragg said, the famous Mrs. Boone. I've heard so much about you, how you leap into burning buildings and lift overturned wagons. Quite the frontier heroine. What's happening here? Clara asked, not acknowledging his condescending tone. Elias's jaw was tight. Mister, Cragg is making an offer on our land. I'm not making an offer, Cragg corrected smoothly. I'm informing Mr. Boone that the Montana Land Company has discovered a prior claim to this property. It seems the original survey was flawed. This land was never properly titled. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. Elias has lived here for over 10 years. Squatting, technically. Cragg said, Oh, I'm sure it was an honest mistake. These frontier surveys are notoriously unreliable, but the fact remains this property belongs to the Montana Land Company. However, he smiled, I'm prepared to be generous. I'll give you market value for the improvements you've made. The cabin, the outbuildings, enough to start over somewhere else. And if we refuse, Elias's voice was dangerously quiet, then I'll have the sheriff evict you. It would be a shame to see Mrs. Boone dragged from her home in the snow. But the law is the law. Clara moved to stand beside Elias, her hand finding his shoulder. Show us this supposed prior claim. Cragg produced a document, official-looking, with seals and signatures. Clara studied it, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. The dates, the property description. This is dated 3 months ago, she said slowly. How can a prior claim be dated 3 months ago? Cragg's smile flickered. A clerical error. The claim itself is from 1871. This is merely the documentation. Then where's the original? Lost in a fire, I'm afraid. But the territorial records support our position. He stood, gathering his papers. I'll give you a week to consider my offer. After that, I'll proceed with eviction proceedings. He tipped his hat mockingly to Clara. Good day, Mrs. Boone, Mr. Boone. After he left, Elias slumped in his chair. He's been planning this. Other families have gotten similar notices. The Chens, the Murphys, even old Pete's mining claim. He can't just steal people's homes. He can if he has the law on his side, and enough money to make sure he does. Elias rubbed his face. We could take his offer, start over somewhere else. No. Clara's voice was fierce. This is our home, where you lived with Sarah, where we built our life together. We're not giving it up without a fight. Clara, be practical. We can't fight the Montana Land Company. They have lawyers, connections, money. And we have something they don't. She moved around the table to face him. We have a community. People who owe us debts of gratitude. People who won't stand by and watch their neighbors be thrown into the snow. Elias caught her hands. What are you planning? I don't know yet, but I know we're not giving up. She smiled grimly. You married a woman who runs toward trouble. Remember well, trouble just walked into our home, and I'm not running away from it. The next morning, Clara called a meeting at the boarding house. Word spread quickly, and soon the dining room was packed. The Murphys were there, Jenny Sullivan, the Chens, old Pete, even Martha Pritchard and her circle, Doctor. Wells stood near the back with several other business owners. Clara stood before them, no longer the desperate woman who'd arrived on the stage nearly a year ago. You all know why we're here. William Cragg and his company are trying to steal our homes with paper and lies. He's counting on us being too poor, too scattered, too powerless to fight back. What can we do? Someone called out. He's got the law. Does he? Clara pulled out the document Cragg had shown them. This supposed prior claim has more holes than Swiss cheese. The dates don't match, The property descriptions are vague, and conveniently, all the original documents were lost in a fire. Samuel Chen stood. My grandfather kept meticulous records of all land transactions in this area. I have his journals. There's no mention of any Montana Land Company claims, because they didn't exist until Cragg created them. Clara said, "This is theft, pure and simple, but he's counting on us not having the resources to prove it." "So what do we do?" That was Jenny Sullivan, her face set with determination. "We fight back, together." Clara looked around the room. "I propose we pool our resources. Hire a lawyer from Helena. A good one. Someone who can't be bought by Cragg's Eastern money." "That'll cost a fortune," someone protested. "Less than losing our homes," Elias said, standing beside Clara. "And we've all helped each other before. The Murphys helped rebuild the Chen's fence after the storm. Jenny's husband worked old Pete's claim when he was laid up. We've shared food, labor, hope. Now we share this fight." Martha Pritchard stood, surprising everyone. "The sewing circle will contribute. Mr. Cragg made the mistake of approaching my husband about our property as well. He seemed to think we'd abandon our less fortunate neighbors to save ourselves." Her spine was rigid with offended pride. "He was wrong." One by one, people began pledging support. Money, despite the hardship it would cause. Labor to help those whose work would suffer during the fight. Food to share so no one went hungry while funds went to legal fees. Dr. Wells stepped forward. "I know a lawyer in Helena, James Morrison. He's young, ambitious, and has a particular dislike for land companies that prey on settlers. I'll wire him today. And I'll go through every record in the land office." Mayor Hutchins added, "If there's proof Cragg's claims are fraudulent, we'll find it." The meeting broke up with a sense of purpose that had been missing moments before. As people filed out, many stopped to clasp Clara's hand or Elias's shoulder. This wasn't just about individual properties anymore. It was about Dry Pine itself, the community they'd built together. That night, as Clara and Elias prepared for bed, he said, "You did it. You turned a group of frightened people into an army." "Not an army, a family." She brushed her hand through his hair. "Families protect each other. Cragg won't give up easily. He'll try to divide us, buy some of us off, threaten others. Then we'll have to be stronger than his money and meaner than his threats." Clara's smile was sharp. "I didn't cross a continent to be run off by a man in a fancy coat." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. James Morrison arrived from Helena Young, as Dr. Wells had said, with bright eyes and a fighter's instinct. He took one look at Cragg's documents and laughed. "Forgeries," he said bluntly. "Good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. The seals are wrong for the supposed date. The signatures don't match territorial records. And this supposed fire that destroyed the originals, there's no record of any fire at the land office in 1871. "Can you prove it in court?" Clara asked. "Give me time and access to the territorial archives. We'll not only prove these are forgeries, we'll probably find evidence of broader fraud. Men like Cragg rarely stop at one scheme." Cragg, meanwhile, tried every trick he could. He offered individual buyouts, trying to break the coalition. When that failed, he hired men to intimidate rough types who loitered outside the boarding house and followed women on their errands. It backfired spectacularly. The men of Dry Pine took turns standing guard. Even Frank, who'd given Clara such trouble in her early days, stationed himself outside the general store with a prominently displayed shotgun. "Nobody threatens our women folk," he said when Clara thanked him. "You saved my cousin's boy from that fire. This is how we pay debts in Dry Pine." The town meeting came 3 weeks later. The hall was packed, the atmosphere electric. Cragg sat at the front with 2 lawyers from Billings, confident despite the unified opposition. James Morrison stood to present their case. He was magnificent, laying out the evidence of forgery, the pattern of fraud, the testimonies of longtime residents. He produced Samuel Chen's grandfather's journals, Mayor Hutchins's research, even correspondence showing Cragg had tried similar schemes in other territories. When he finished, the hall erupted in approval. Cragg's lawyers tried to respond, but their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Judge Carlton, brought in from the territorial court, looked stern. "Mr. Cragg, these are serious allegations: fraud, forgery, attempted theft of property." "Your Honor." Cragg stood, his composure finally cracking. "These people don't understand progress. This land is wasted on subsistence farmers and hunters. I represent investors who could make something of this territory by stealing from the people who built it." Clara stood, unable to stay silent. "Your Honor, we may not have Eastern money, but we have something more valuable. We have roots here. Every cabin, every fence, every well was built with our own hands. We've buried our dead in this soil, raised our children here, survived winters that would send Mr. Cragg running back to his comfortable offices." She looked around the room at her neighbors, her family of choice. "He sees numbers on a map. We see home, and we'll fight for it with everything we have." The judge held up his hand for silence. "The evidence is clear. These claims are fraudulent. Mr. Cragg, you and your associates will face criminal charges. As for the properties in question, the current residents' claims stand." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Helena. Afterwards, as Cragg was led away by the sheriff, he passed Clara. "You think you've won something here? Progress can't be stopped. Your little town will be swallowed eventually." "Maybe," Clara said, "but not today, and not by you." That night, Dry Pine celebrated. The town hall once again became a place of joy rather than judgment. Dancing, music, food shared freely among neighbors who'd stood together and won. Clara found herself outside for a moment of quiet, looking up at the stars. Elias joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You were magnificent today," he said against her hair. "That speech, you had the whole room ready to fight Cragg with their bare hands." "I just spoke the truth. Your truth has a way of becoming everyone's truth. It's a gift." She turned in his arms. "We did it. We saved our home." "You did it. You saw the threat, rallied the town, refused to give up when lesser people would have taken the money and run." "Lesser people don't have what I have," Clara said. "A husband who stands beside me, a community that's become family, a life worth fighting for." "And what a life it is," Elias agreed, pulling her closer. "Full of burning barns and overturned wagons and land thieves and you, jumping into all of it without hesitation. You make me sound reckless. You are reckless, beautifully, courageously reckless, and I thank God for it every day." He kissed her softly. "Come on, Mrs. Hart is threatening to tell embarrassing stories about our courtship. We should probably intervene." "Let her," Clara said, taking his hand as they walked back toward the light and warmth. "We've got nothing to hide. Never have." As they entered the hall, a cheer went up. Their neighbors, their friends, their chosen family welcoming them back into the celebration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did in a place like Dry Pine. But tonight, they'd stood together and won. And Clara knew, with the certainty that had carried her through every trial since that cold night in the warehouse, that this was what mattered. Not propriety or expectations or the easy path, but this community, courage, and the choice to fight for what you loved. She was Clara Boone, wife, friend, neighbor, and fighter. She'd found her place not by fitting in, but by being exactly who she was. And as Elias spun her into a dance, surrounded by the people who'd become her world, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed Dry Pine into something magical. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, streams ran high with snowmelt, and the air carried promises of new beginnings. Clara stood in her garden, hands deep in the soil, planting seeds for their first real crop as a married couple. 1.5 years had passed since that desperate night in the warehouse. Sometimes she could hardly believe it, how a woman who'd arrived with nothing but broken promises had built a life so full it sometimes made her heart ache with gratitude. "You're going to wear a hole in that dirt if you keep staring at it." She looked up to find Elias watching from the porch, coffee in hand, that half-smile she loved playing at his lips. His leg barely troubled him now, though she still caught him rubbing it on cold mornings. "Just thinking," she said, brushing soil from her hands. "Dangerous habit." He came down to join her, setting his coffee aside to help with the planting. "What's got you so contemplative?" "Do you remember what you said that first night? About first nights setting the tone for what comes after?" "I remember everything about that night." His hands stilled on the seed packets. "Why, because you were right. That night set the tone, someone seeing me as a person worth helping, not a problem to solve. And everything since then." She gestured at their expanded cabin, the garden, the life they'd built. It all started with that moment of grace. Elias pulled her to her feet, uncaring of the dirt on their hands. "Clara Vale Boone, are you getting sentimental on me?" "Maybe a little." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of home. "Can you blame me?" "Never." He kissed her temple. "But we should finish this planting before—" "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Clara!" Tommy Chen came running up the path, no longer the young boy who'd carried messages, but a gangly teenager with his father's intelligent eyes. "Ma sent me. There's a lady at the boarding house asking for you. Says she came from Boston." Clara's blood chilled. Boston. After all this time. Did she give a name? "Miss Margaret Vale. Said she's your cousin." Clara gripped Ella's hand. Margaret, her youngest cousin, barely 18 when Clara left. What could have brought her all this way? They found Margaret in Mrs. Hart's parlor, looking like a hothouse flower wilting in the frontier sun. She was lovely in that delicate way Clara had never managed, small, blonde, with huge blue eyes that widened when Clara entered. "Clara, is it really O?" Margaret flew across the room, throwing her arms around Clara's neck. "I barely recognized you. You look so strong, so different." "Margaret." Clara held her cousin, noting how thin she felt, how her fashionable dress hung loose. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Margaret pulled back, tears streaming. "Aunt Martha, your mother's sister, she died last month. Left me a bit of money and your letters. The ones you sent before you stopped writing." She glanced at Elias. "You must be the mysterious husband." The family was in quite an uproar when they heard Clara had married without permission. The family lost the right to give permission when they let her leave with nothing but condemnation, Elias said mildly. But Clara heard the steel beneath. "You're right," Margaret said, surprising them. "They were horrible, are horrible, which is why—" She took a shaky breath. "Why I've come to ask if I can stay here with you." Clara sank into a chair. "Margaret, what's happened?" The story came out in rushes. Margaret's father had lost his business. Debts, drink, her mother's health failing under the strain, and worse, a marriage arranged to a man 40 years her senior, wealthy enough to clear the debts. "He's awful. Clara, cruel. His first wife died under questionable circumstances." Margaret's hands trembled. "I know I have no right to ask, after how the family treated you, but I remembered your letters about finding work, building a life. I thought maybe—" "You thought right." Clara took her cousin's hands. "Of course you can stay." "Clara," Elias said quietly, "we should discuss—" "What's to discuss? She's family. She needs help." Clara met his eyes. "I won't turn away someone fleeing the same kind of life I fled." His expression softened. "I wasn't going to suggest we turn her away, just that we should talk about how to best help her." He turned to Margaret. "You're welcome here, Miss Vale. Though I should warn you, life in Dry Pine is nothing like Boston." "I don't want it to be like Boston," Margaret said fiercely. "I want it to be different. I want to be different, like Clara, Clara squeezed her hands. Careful what you wish for. Being like me involves a lot of hard work and occasional building jumping. Building jumping. Long story. Let's get you settled first. They set Margaret up in the cabin's small spare room, originally intended for children that hadn't come yet, though Clara tried not to dwell on that. Watching her cousin take in the simple space, Clara remembered her own first night in Dry Pine, how foreign everything had seemed. It's perfect, Margaret said, though Clara could see her struggling to reconcile this life with what she'd known. What will I do here for work? I mean, I can't just impose. You'll work, Clara said firmly. Same as I did. Mrs. Hart can use help at the boarding house. Can you cook? A little. Mother thought it beneath us, but Cook taught me some things. Then you'll learn more. Can you sew? Yes, quite well, actually. Good. There's always mending to be done. And Margaret, Clara waited until her cousin met her eyes. This won't be easy. People here judge quickly and forgive slowly. You'll have to prove yourself. Like you did. Like I did, and still do, every day. The first weeks were hard. Margaret struggled with the early mornings, the physical labor, the rough miners who didn't watch their language. More than once. Clara found her crying in the washroom, hands red from lye soap, homesickness written in every line of her body. But she didn't quit, and slowly, the town began to accept her. It helped that she was under Clara's protection, and Clara's reputation had weight now. The woman who'd saved children from fires and stood up to land thieves had earned the right to vouch for her own. One evening, about a month after Margaret's arrival, Clara came home to find her cousin and Elias deep in conversation at the kitchen table. Margaret was laughing, really laughing, for the first time since she'd arrived. What's this? Clara asked, pleased to see color in her cousin's cheeks. Your husband was telling me about the time you proposed to him in public, Margaret said, in front of the whole town. Did he mention he said yes? Clara hung up her shawl, noting how natural this felt coming home to family, to warmth, to laughter. Enthusiastically, Elias added, though she didn't give me much choice. Smart woman. Margaret's smile dimmed slightly. Clara, there's something I need to tell you. A letter came today. From Father. Clara tensed. What does he want? He's demanding I return. Says he'll come fetch me if necessary. That I'm disgracing the family by associating with. She stopped, flushing. With me? Clara finished. Let me see the letter. She read it, fury building with each line, the same old accusations, impropriety, wildness, corruption of innocent relatives. But underneath the bluster, she sensed fear. Margaret's marriage was meant to save them financially. Without it, he can't force you back. Elias said, You're of age, and this is Montana, not Boston. We don't hold with forcing women into marriages here. But if he comes, then he'll meet the whole town, Clara said. Let him try to drag you out of Mrs. Hart's boarding house. See how far he gets? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that after everything the family was so cruel to you. You weren't. Clara pulled her cousin close. And even if you had been, it wouldn't matter. That's what I learned here. Family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's the people who see you at your lowest and help you stand. It's... A knock interrupted her. Tommy Chen again. But this time his face was split with a huge grin. Mrs. Clara. Come quick, it's Mrs. Sullivan, the baby's coming and she's asking for you. Clara grabbed her shawl. In the months since Jenny Sullivan's wagon accident, they'd become close friends. This was Jenny's first child, and she was terrified. I'll come too, Margaret said, then hesitated. Unless would I be in the way? Can you follow directions and keep calm? I think so. Then come. Extra hands are always welcome. The next hours were a blur of activity. Jenny's labor was hard, and Dr. Wells was grateful for the help. Clara held Jenny's hands, spoke encouragement, while Margaret fetched water and linens with growing confidence. When little James Sullivan finally made his appearance, squalling and healthy, the sun was rising. Jenny wept with exhaustion and joy, her husband looking dazed with happiness. "Clara," Jenny gasped, "meet your godson, if you'll have him." Clara's eyes filled. "I'd be honored." Walking home as the town woke around them, Margaret said quietly, I've never seen anything like that. Birth or women being strong? Both, in Boston. It's all hidden away. Shameful somehow. But that was... She searched for words. Beautiful. Powerful. Jenny was so brave. Women are always brave. We just don't always get credit for it. Clara linked their arms. You were good in there. Steady, helpful. I was terrified. So was I, the first time. But you did what needed doing anyway. Clara squeezed her arm. That's the secret. Margaret, being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about acting despite it. They found Elias making breakfast, the cabin filled with the smell of coffee and bacon. He took one look at their exhausted faces and smiled. Boy or girl? Boy, James, and I'm to be godmother. Clara sank into a chair. I need to sleep for a week. After breakfast, he said, setting plates before them. And after you tell me what has you looking so thoughtful. Clara realized she had been staring into space, just thinking about circles, how I came here looking for one life and found another. Now Margaret's done the same, and little James, born into a community that will raise him to be strong and kind and free. Speaking of community, Elias said carefully, there's something we should discuss, with Margaret here now, and your work at the boarding house, and my hunting picking up again. What is it? He took her hand. This cabin's getting small. I thought maybe it was time to build on another room or two. Maybe... He glanced at Margaret, then back to Clara. Maybe a room that could be a nursery. Someday. Clara's heart clenched. They'd been married over a year now, and no child had come. She'd begun to wonder if there ever would be. Elias. No pressure, he said quickly. Just hope. Room for hope. Margaret stood abruptly. I should go help Mrs. Hart with breakfast service. Margaret, you don't have to. I do. You two need to talk, and I need to start earning my keep. She kissed Clara's cheek. Thank you for everything, for showing me that there's another way to live. After she left, Clara and Elias sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara said, I want the rooms, the nursery, even if it stays empty. And if it doesn't, she met his eyes, then we'll raise the strongest, stubbornest, most fearless children Montana has ever seen. God help us all. Elias laughed, pulling her into his lap. Clara Boone's children loose in the world. Our children, she corrected, with your steady nature to balance my recklessness. I love your recklessness. Good thing, since it's not going anywhere. She kissed him softly. I love you, Elias Boone, for seeing me that night, for taking my hand like it was something sacred, for building this life with me, one choice at a time. I love you too, Clara, for being exactly who you are, for showing me that life after loss isn't just possible, it can be extraordinary. They sat together as the morning sun filled their small cabin, dreaming of rooms to build and children to raise and all the life still to come. Outside, Dry Pine was waking up shops opening, people calling greetings, the daily rhythm of a community that had become home. Clara thought about that first night cold, desperate, alone, how Elias had taken her hand carefully, as if she might break or bolt, how wrong he'd been. She wasn't fragile, she was strong, and getting stronger every day. What are you thinking? Elias asked. About hands, Clara said. How yours felt that first night, how they feel now. different but the same. He lifted their joined hands, studying them. These hands have built something good together. And they're not done building yet. No, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her palm. Not nearly done. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Samuel Chen, grinning widely. Sorry to disturb, but thought you'd want to know telegram just came through. That land company Cragg worked for, they've been shut down by the territorial government. Fraud charges across 3 territories. Your testimony helped seal it. Clara felt a fierce satisfaction. Good. Maybe that will discourage the next vulture from trying. Maybe. But if not, we know what to do now. Stand together. Fight back. Thanks to you two showing us how. After Samuel left, Clara turned to Elias. Ready for breakfast at Mrs. Hart's Margaret's, probably overwhelmed by now. In a minute. He pulled her close again. Just want to hold my wife a bit longer. The woman who came to town with nothing and somehow gave everyone everything, courage, hope, the belief that we could be more than what others decided for us. I didn't give anyone anything they didn't already have, just reminded them to use it. Like I said, everything. They walked to town hand in hand, greeting neighbors, stopping to admire baby James through the Sullivans' window, checking on Margaret, who was managing the breakfast rush with growing confidence. It was an ordinary morning in Dry Pine, Montana, nothing special except for everything that made it home. That night, as Clara lay in bed beside Elias, she thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach so long ago. That woman had been looking for Owen Mather, for a predetermined life, for safety in the expected. Instead, she'd found Elias Boone, who took her hand like it was something sacred, found work that challenged her and people who needed her, found that being too tall, too strong, too much wasn't a flaw but a gift, if you used it right. She'd said it was her first night, and he'd told her first nights mattered because they set the tone for what came after. He'd been right. That night of grace and seeing had led to all of this love, family, community, home. Still awake, Elias murmured. Just grateful, she whispered back. His arm tightened around her. For what? For cold nights and warm hearts. For men who see women as people. For towns that learn to change. For cousins who trust us with their new beginnings. For friends who name us godparents. She turned to face him in the darkness. For you. Always for you. Clara Vale Boone, he said softly. You are the best thing that ever happened to this town, and to me. We happened to each other, she corrected. And we're still happening. Every day, every choice, every time we take each other's hands like they're something sacred. They are, he said simply. They are. And in the quiet cabin, in the small town, at the edge of the frontier where anything was possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. Clara Boone fell asleep knowing she was exactly where she belonged, not because it was predetermined or easy or expected, but because she'd chosen it, fought for it, built it with her own 2 hands and the help of those who'd chosen to see her truly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. But tonight, she was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening at home? During your commute, or perhaps while working, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's connect over our shared love of these frontier stories. If you enjoyed this journey with Clara and Elias, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate authentic tales of courage, love, and community in the American West. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.